Thanks for being here. So my topic today is to try to convince you what's the future of storage or data storage looks like, and how DNA may play a role in it. As you all know, today we all deal with lots of data, and the rate of data being produced is exponentially increasing. Is it working okay? All right. And the data markets are actually fragmented into, when I joined this industry, it was only about the personal computer, but right now there's data we call big data in the enterprise system. There's every car has lots of memory and storage system. Of course, you have phones, which have lots of storage, as well as there's lots of medical industry applications. Now, there's been a lot of projections that the amount of data needed will be increased by many orders of magnitude. But with the recent advent of AI, everything is supposed to actually increase by 10x over all the other projections, if not more. So this is very good for a memory company to be working on data. But the challenge I will be discussing today is, can our existing technologies actually support this level of data storage, which may be required going forward? And you've all heard about AI. It's permeating and affecting all aspects of our life. Do you hear some noise? Do I need to change something? Are you okay? I'm hearing my own noise for some reason. And it's essentially what that means is that everything we do today will change in some way. There is AI in your phones today. Within 2 years, you have inference-based AI chips in your phone, the next phone you get, which will be listening to you and actually acting on what it listens to you the next time you want it to do something. So it's coming at us fast, and there's no stopping it, you like it or not. So either you can use the phone, or you'll be using some sort of AI application. So the challenge we have on our side is, how do we design a system which can actually support this? Now, this is hopefully a high-level enough system of data. What cold data means is, it's a data which is stored in large quantities on hard disk drives or storage devices today. And what that means is, the data which is not being used all the time is stored there. When the data is needed, it's accessed. What's called the warm data is a data like your pictures on your phone, or your video on your phone. It's right there for you to use. The moment you want to use it, it goes into what's called the hot data, which is a fast performance memory, and it uses the data and start playing your video. So there's just 3 categories of data: the hot data, which is at your fingertips; warm data, which is just ready to be used; and cold data, which sits somewhere, which has to be accessed when you need it. And usually the amount of data, there's more of cold data than the hot data. Now, if you look at the worldwide chip output today, all the devices built by all the chip companies in the world every year, if you count the device function, more than 80 to 90% of the device function is actually storage, even though it doesn't matter who makes the chips. Even if a logic company like TSMC or Intel makes a chip, 60% of the chip devices actually have memory or storage function. So all the devices around you and all the chips have predominantly a storage function, even though we all mostly hear about logic devices and transistors. First time I built this, I was surprised at myself. We checked it 5 times. This is actually the reality. Now, in terms of the memory devices, we've been working on DRAM and NAND, are the 2 types of chips in your phone that you use. And there's been a 30+ years of technology development going on, and most of those having to do with very complex structures to be built, very complex materials, and doing all this at nanometer scales in 1 dimension and the micrometer scales in the vertical dimension. So I usually like to call them as nanomems. You have a nanometer technologies as well as you have micrometer technologies. In addition, we have been looking at other types of memory technology over the years. Sometimes you hear them as RRAM or STRAM, which is a spin-based or electron spin-based magnetic memory, or ferroelectrics. And the reason we have looked at all these technologies is to make sure, is there a better technology to get us better scaling for the future systems. And you can see what I'm showing on the left chart is a typical computer system, where on the left you have a CPU, the logic central processing unit, and next to it is a fast memory, which is DRAM. And then the NAND memory, as I showed, is a warm memory. Cold memory is not shown here, it's off the chart. It's much more slower and sits on the side. So with all the development we have done in the new technologies in the last 25 years, and industry has spent billions of dollars doing it, we come up with some of the most promising technologies as such. The table is the performance spec we are able to see. Don't have to read the numbers, just say that the DRAM is green is good. DRAM is very, very fast. Red means it doesn't have retention, so you have to keep refreshing your data. NAND is the other technology where green is good, retention is good, but it is relatively slow. Every other technology you have come up with falls somewhere in the middle. So there's nothing which maps one or the other, which means that we don't really have a technology which will replace either DRAM or NAND, which is the mainstream technologies that you have today. Not only can it not replace it, it cannot really outperform it. So we are basically left with DRAM and NAND as our main technologies, and we have to try to scale them and support the ever-increasing demand for data. And emerging memory, again, it doesn't really fit anywhere in there. So the question now is, should we stop doing any materials research? Not really. Instead of doing the material research the way we have done it before, which is just brute force, so we have really scanned through the entire periodic table. And what I show on this periodic table is all the elements which are present in our R&D fab in Micron. We have looked at every element on the periodic table, and you can pick any element, it's available. The only reason I cross out the gases, helium and neon, we have those gases, we just can't make any device out of it. And the other elements which we have crossed out are radioactive elements which are unsafe. So essentially looking at a new element or trying to make a new compound is not the answer, because we've already done it. So really the future is about using intelligent physics-based, modeling-based, some would even say AI-based approach to discovering new materials and really looking at new mechanisms. Remember, all our technologies are down at 10 angstrom to 50 angstrom, 1 to 5 nanometer device sizes. So any material you discover needs to be functional at those dimensions. And that's where there's an opportunity to actually discover new mechanisms of physics, or maybe even discover new materials, such as 2D materials, which were discovered a few years ago. So the message there is that we have to really be thinking out of the box on how to discover or use new materials or physics mechanisms and find some solutions for the memory. Now, in parallel, there was some discussion this morning on the biosciences and the biodata. So if you really think about medicine meets big data and all these advancements in genomics, and this is reality, you can have your genome map today. And if you think about how much data is that, that's close to 5 terabytes of data for one person. And you can multiply that by how many people will be able to afford it. And you can do this under $100 today. But that's not where the story just stops. Our microbiome actually is even more important for our health. We have probably about 4 pounds of microbiome. And the interesting part is the genetic information in the microbiome is much richer than our DNA. So each one of those microbials have their own DNA. And that, if you add up all that information, it really goes super exponential in terms of how much data will be needed just for around our health technology, health applications. So a few years ago, we saw some proposal. So there was some anecdotal reports saying that DNA can be stored or it can survive over a long time. There were reports of dinosaur DNA having survived through millions of years. There were some actually claims that we can use DNA to store information. And we actually had funded research into polymer-based DNA, and we know, and that didn't really work very well, and we are kind of quite skeptic, how can you use organic material to store information, because we've already tried polymers, it doesn't quite work. So Viktor Zirnov, he's a physicist. So being physicists, we said, well, let's ask the question, physics-based question. If we look at the molecule of DNA, and from purely physics point of view, which means no engineering issues, perfect engineering, can DNA actually store data? And we actually did a first principles physics modeling, and to our surprise, we found out that the DNA actually is much more effective at holding information than polymers. And our conclusion was that even in the presence of water or some environment, of course in vacuum at controlled temperatures, it can store information for a long time. Even under normal environments, it can store information in principle for 100 years or more easily. And the other interesting part is the DNA by nature could store more information per unit weight than any other material that we know. Now, so looking at that, this is just a side note. It turns out in the ancient Hindu Vedas, for 5,000 years ago, they talked about manas. Manas is a memory, which is a memory in the body. Now, I'm not trying to claim they knew about DNA or I'm just trying to connect back that there has been a realization that our body stores information, and this information was not what we store in our brain. They actually described 9 different types of memory. One of them was that our body remembers when it gets sick. That's essentially the immune system. So next time you get sick, your immune system has memory. So the memory of being sick and having your body respond to it, in a way, is a memory stored in our biological system. Of course, they talked about your nose on your face is from your grandmother from 7 generations ago, so they're talking about evolution and so forth. There's 9 those examples. So anyways, just a side note to keep everybody awake. So how will a DNA storage will work actually? So to think about, first of all, you have to start with the same as zeros and ones, because the normal outside world is all digital. You have to convert that into information in the storage in the DNA, and then you have to actually synthesize those DNA molecules. Now, the interesting thing I was going to say is, what we use is a binary system, 0, 1, 0, 1, which means if we have, let's say, 2 digits, 0, 1, 1, 0, there's only 4 bits of information. DNA is a base of 4. You have A, G, C, T, 4. So if you have 2 bits, see, it's exponentially increased, right? You can show 16 bits of data. So it's actually exponentially larger number. And if you increase bits to 8, you actually get thousands times more information stored in those 16 bits. It's a very interesting mathematical exercise you can do. What that means is the same amount of DNA compared to any other materials can store exponentially more information. So of course, once you are able to synthesize it, you have to store it, or you can store it in a test tube, I guess, as shown here, but then you have to actually access that. So this one just shows you a little magnet to access it. It's a schematic. Then, of course, once you access the DNA, you can read the information again. Now, in reality, what will the DNA data storage system look like? So on the left, you see the write. So write is essentially changing from ones and zeros into something which you store in DNA. And on the extreme right is read, so you convert the DNA information back to reading. Now the challenge is actually in the middle. How do you make a system which can take the information and store it into the DNA, and then you have to put the DNA somewhere, then you have to be able to access it back. So there is a physical question of how do you access and manipulate DNA, and then how do you get the whole system to work, and how do you do it fast enough? Now, this is the cold storage. Even in the cold storage, you don't have years to do this, right? You have minutes, maybe hours to go read that. So you still need to be as good as a, let's say, hard disk drive, if not like a minimum as a tape drive to be able to read. So you have to be able to read very fast, even if you don't write very fast. So there are some actually system level challenges on how to make this. The good news is the cost of the DNA is not an issue because of all the other work done in the past, and the genome, its cost has been really decreasing at an exponential level. However, to store this level of information, the cost has to decrease by another few orders of magnitude. So it's on a good trajectory, but it's not there yet to be affordable to store all the world's information in DNA. But it's good enough to be able to do something with it. Now, in terms of various proposals out there on how to make the system, there's been a work out of Harvard using fluorescent molecules to actually write information as well as read information. You can use multiple wavelengths to get the high density information written into it. There's actually a group, company here in Paris, which has proposed this biosafe DNA drive, where you can do this in a way that this is green and safe. And actually, in one of my TED Talks, I mentioned the DNA as being a medium, and one of the people in the audience afterwards was concerned. Well, so are we going to actually kill living beings to store information? So the reality is that this DNA doesn't have to be live DNA. It's a concept of DNA. We can make molecules of DNA which are not live, but they're synthesized. So it's a good thing that there's a company out there really talking about biosafety as well as doing it in a way which is environmentally friendly. And in this case, they're trying to replace, it's a disk drive sort of structure or a concept. Now, assuming that we can build these, if you look at the numbers on how much information will be required, and these are all estimates, maybe we even need more, but you can think about, we may need 10 to the 14 kilograms of silicon if you were to use DRAM and NAND chips to store the information. All the information technically can fit in 1 kilogram of DNA worth of molecules. In reality, probably it'll take more because DNA is not solid. Maybe it's 300 kilograms. Now that's the information density is not really an argument, and the information storage ability, from first principles, we think is feasible. So the question, cost is in the right way, trajectory is the right way. So I think that's, you can say, is okay. I mean, it'll get there. Now the challenge really is the rest of it. So this is the table we published. However, a lot of people didn't notice that asterisk. It's a cellular DNA. It's not system level. So the metrics of hard disk, flash, DRAM, those are the products you can buy. They're functioning products. So, however, the cellular DNA is more of a conceptual capability for that molecule. That molecule can perform. So at the molecular level, performance is fairly solid, fairly good. But how do you make a system, entire system, to do that is still a challenge. So there has been actually lots of interest in the last 10 years or so. There's some SRC research focus on it, looking at the basics of DNA analysis, DNA as a storage medium. So you could argue there's lots of startups. Actually, I don't have all of them listed here. So you can think of a scenario where you have conventional companies like Micron, IBM, Intel making chips and making conventional memory. And then you have the users such as Amazon and so forth, which store vast amounts of information. And then in the middle, you could have these startups trying to come up with a new industry for storing large amounts of information. And that's and most likely these materials and these systems will be able to store archival type of information. So maybe replace what's stored in tape drive because of the performance requirements, and maybe store what's on the hard disk drive. So that's more likely because of the system level challenges. But even to get there, there still has to be a lot of work to be done here. So in general, it's very exciting. It's almost poetic to be thinking that information about your health, about your DNA, about your gut, will eventually be stored in a molecule which you're made of. So that's kind of interesting if and when that happens. My closing thoughts, I mean, so we have lots of new applications with AI, which among other things, we talked about how much energy it's taking and so forth, and there's probably alternate computer and memory architectures we have proposed to address that. That's a different talk. I just want to plug it. We have to do compute different than what we are doing today, because the amount of energy needed is not sustainable. An opportunity to really have materials and device and circuit level innovations to support the next generation of technologies. And really, I think more investment should be done on the DNA, including other things to store to support this vector. On the DNA memory, I think it's certainly very promising as a molecule of storing lots of information, vast amounts of information in small space. It has high density and longevity in principle, and there's potential applications with the DNA memory. The system level, building a system is still a challenge, although there's many companies looking at many innovative ideas and making some functional system levels, which are functional at some level. But there's a long way to go, before it can be widely adopted and maybe replace some of the archival memory or some other sectors in the near future. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Gurtej. I guess the summary is that we'll have small nuclear reactor and large DNA drive. Time for question. I have one. In the studies that you've been showing, I understand that you tried polymers and it was not optimal. DNA was, or even more. Do you have an understanding of why?
Yeah. So in the polymers, so you have a carbon-carbon bond everywhere, right? So it's a covalent bond. And what needs to happen to store information and read and write and erase information is that something in that molecule has to change. In the polymers, you break the bonds and you connect them back again, but those materials are not very resilient. You can do it maybe once on a good material 10 times and then you're done. DNA is one of those, I mean, there's more experts here who know about DNA. It's like a miracle molecule if you really think about it. So imagine you're built of DNA. DNA is what makes you, and the DNA, and you're stable, right? So DNA has to be stable. You're sitting here. While you're sitting here, there's all these cell multiplications, all these things going on, which means it has to be unstable at the same time to be able to split. So DNA can be stable and unstable while you're sitting here with no extra energy coming from anywhere else.
Is it linked to the 3D shape of it?
So it's really the configurational energy. So it just straightens out, splits, straightens back, coils back in, and it's stable. So it is while there's no external energy, right? That's the key. So you don't have to apply any energy, and in a way, it's amazing material, and that's kind of what makes it stable in a stable state.
Yeah.
And at the same time, you can make it unstable without damaging it. So you can read, you can write, then you can read. And it can store information for a long time.
So I have in me the best stable memory.
So sometimes you have to learn from nature with all the smartness and AI we are thinking of, but nature has already done some things which are pretty amazing.
Any other questions? Yes, over here.
So what you're describing, and it's fascinating, thank you, is the ultimate biomimetism. But DNA has been optimized to be read by cellular machinery. Is there any way, maybe in a subsequent version, to use cellular machinery to read the DNA that you encoded somewhere?
Yes, I think so. Really, the genome, the whole industry around genomes, how to read DNA in a very efficient way, and so forth. There's actually proposals out there where you can make DNA with a specific type of DNA. You can go from ISO 4, and in nature you have 4 of those ligands. You can go to 8. So it's really, once you know it exists in nature, you can make a DNA molecule. You just can't make it so that it can sustain life. But it can do this work very well. You can actually optimize it to do this better than a normal DNA. So certainly all those techniques can be used. Challenge is, how do you make it really very efficient at a desktop level, or in a way where you have to read, the amount of information you have to read is quite a lot, right? And you have to have a high bandwidth to do that. So the system level challenges is the main challenge we have to worry about. But all those techniques which are known out there can be used. But we probably need to invent some new ones also.